It is time to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C.
The almighty savior Donald Trump ran on the promise of, quote, draining the swamp or cleaning out this obviously corrupted and controlled system. He ran on the hopes and the fears of the American people. Many believed he would truly change things. Yet he went on to employ a transition team full of corporate lobbyists, neocons, bankers, and career politicians. The corporations represented by the lobbyists include Visa, Coke, GE, Verizon, HSBC, Pfizer, Dow Chemical, and Goldman Sachs. As you're seeing on your screen now, I have underlined the massive corporations they represent. What I'm not understanding here is how this is any different than any other presidential candidate. They're slaves to these global corporations. The president typically has no power or influence to really suggest or change anything. Why are we not questioning Donald Trump with all these red flags? Why are we so convinced he's an outsider? Here's another Trump hire for United States Treasury, Steven Mnuchin, a good old Goldman Sachs boy and son of a partner. That's about as insider as you can possibly get. And this is for Treasury. Who's really calling the shots here? To quote David Icke, another Goldman Sachs clone, I couldn't agree more. They put these clone-like Sachs affiliates in positions of power globally. Why? The Zionist banking system have their tentacles in everything. And moving on to another member of the Trump team and Goldman Sachs boy, Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon. Don't worry, the private banking system won't have any influence in this presidency. Con man Trump doesn't even try to hide it on this one. I don't know if people just don't look into it or what, but his tax plan is ridiculous for everyone that's not in the 1%. The Trump tax plan could be a video in itself, but come on people, this is right in front of our face. The 1% will come out with more than they've ever had by the end of a Trump presidency, and the hypocrisy continues. The main fear-mongering tactic used by the Trump campaign to get elected was how unsecure the border is, and how he's going to build a wall to protect us and our economy, which is the ultimate classic politician move. And the same thing always seems to end up happening. It becomes a fence. They all say they're going to build a wall or beef up security or whatever. At the end of the day, they don't really have any say. The borders are open for a reason. If the hidden hands wanted them to be secured, they'd be secured. And that's not all, folks.
Are you really going to build a wall?
Yes.
They're talking about a fence in the Republican Congress. Would you accept a fence?
For certain areas I would, but certain areas the wall is more appropriate. I'm very good at this. It's called construction. But
so part wall,
fence will
part
be,
fence?
Yeah, there could be some fencing.
But when you talk about apology, I think the one that you should really be apologizing for, and the thing that you should be apologizing for, are the 33,000 emails that you deleted and that you acid washed. And then the 2 boxes of emails and other things last week that were taken from an office and are now missing. And I'll tell you what, I didn't think I'd say this, but I'm going to say it. And I hate to say it, but if I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation, because there has never been so many lies, so much deception. There has never been anything like it, and we're going to have a special prosecutor. When I speak, I go out and speak. The people of this country are furious. In my opinion, the people that have been long-term workers at the FBI are furious. There has never been anything like this, where emails and you get a subpoena, and after getting the subpoena, you delete 33,000 emails. And then you acid wash them, or bleach them, as you would say, a very expensive process. So we're going to get a special prosecutor, and we're going to look into it, because you know what? People have been, their lives have been destroyed for doing 1/5 of what you've done. And it's a disgrace. And honestly, you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Secretary Clinton, I want to follow up on that. I'm going to let you talk about email.
Because everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not surprised. In the first debate,
And we really, the audience needs to calm down here.
I told people that it would be impossible to be fact-checking Donald all the time. I'd never get to talk about anything I want to do and how we're going to really make lives better for people. So Once again, go to HillaryClinton.com. We have literally Trump. You can fact check him in real time. Last time at the first debate, we had millions of people fact checking, so I expect we'll have millions more fact checking because, you know, it's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, first of all, I know her very well, and I know her husband very well, and I like them both. And they are, just really terrific people. I like them both very much, but I think you'll be looking at the record of Hillary Clinton and how did she do as Secretary of State, probably above and beyond everybody else and everything else. You'll be looking at her record, and everybody else will be looking at her record. I don't know that Benghazi, it doesn't seem to have resonated like perhaps it should have, but many other things have come up, and the world is in turmoil. And I think that a lot of people will be looking at Hillary's record as Secretary of State, and she will be defending that record, and I'm sure she'll do a good job of defending it, but that will be the thing they will be going for.
We all remember how much the outsider, Donald Trump, despised the insider, Hillary Clinton, and how he was going to lock her up, and all the nasty things he said about her. Well, guess what? Now she's a good person, and has done nothing but a good job. What about the emails, Trump? What about Benghazi? What happened to the private investigator? This is starting to look like a grand stage show, isn't it? I don't understand why people still are believing in this system. What are we going to do? Wait another 4 years and let them take everything from us? And don't give me that BS that he has to get along to get things done. If you're going to drain the swamp, drain the fucking swamp. That's why so many had hope. As we can see, these people have been close for a long, long time. They move in the same circles and always have. Trump almost certainly has some sort of relationship with all these people being exposed in WikiLeaks. He definitely did with Epstein. Speaking of moving in the same circles, he would have to be in the real estate industry. You need major cash flow from establishment connections, from bankers, lawyers, etc. to get to where Trump has gotten and to con as many people as Trump has. It's all public knowledge, or do we not remember? Onto the money that funded Trump's campaign. Contrary to the beliefs of many, Trump had numerous donors. Trump's top donor, James Harris Simons, is a Zionist. Another top donor was Robert Kagan, also a Zionist. Hillary's top donor was Haim Saban, and the rest of the super PAC, for that matter, are all Zionists. We all agree that the money that funds the candidate controls them, right? If you don't think that Trump will be pushing the same New World Order agenda that Hillary would have been pushing in some way or another, you're lying to yourself. Both their donors answer to the same puppet master, and if you control both sides, you control the game. Maybe Trump will be doing it unknowingly, but by looking at his tax plan, it doesn't seem like that. Nevertheless, we will continue to move towards a complete Orwellian state unless we wake up. We can't just sit back and wait for him to possibly change something when it's obviously he's not going to with all these red flags. And if we sit back and wait, it's probably going to be too late by the end of his presidency. We need to start pointing out these issues, and by waking up in masses, we begin to change the system.
When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one.
With President Obama in his final year, he may be the worst thing that ever happened to Israel.
Those were some snippets from the acclaimed Trump speech to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is a massive pro-Israel lobbying group that everyone must please. Also, this is where you'll find many of the puppet masters. The state of Israel is nothing more than an extension of the House of Rothschild. Trump is what you call a Gentile collaborator. There are many of these, specifically in the U.S., because it has nothing to do with being Jewish. Zionism is a political ideology. In short, Zionism is so powerful because it controls the money, aka the banks. It also creates conflicts and finances both sides, the classic divide and conquer tactic. There's some great in-depth research out there. If this is new to you, I suggest you look into it. Trump claims Israel is treated like a second-class citizen. He also claims Obama was the worst thing that could ever happen to Israel. As you can see, the United States government has given billions of dollars on multiple occasions, $38 billion at one point. We also scrap our useful military equipment to give to them. Israel is always the victim. Even though they're genociding a whole group of people, they're still the victim. Israel is the only country that can kick black people out for being black and get away with it. Again, this isn't an anti-Jewish thing. There are many Jewish people who depose the state of Israel. As you can see, since World War II, the Zionists have basically taken over every major corporation and completely control the media. This is important to know when discerning the truth. This is an interesting story from the American Free Press that has been completely covered up by the alternative media. I feel it's worth sharing. An inquiry into the background of the flamboyant American entrepreneur Donald J. Trump provides some surprising insights into Trump's path to power and influence. For the fact that Trump's rise to stardom came as a direct consequence of his having functioned as hardly more than a colorful frontman for some of the very wealthy behind-the-scenes sponsors. Everyone knows, of course, about Trump's gambling operations and of the wide-ranging links of the gambling industry to organized crimes. But the story is much bigger than that. In his own memoir, The Art of the Deal, Trump proudly described it how in 1987 he brought his first casino interest when he purchased 93% of the voting stock in the resort's international gambling concern. What Trump doesn't tell his readers is what the late Andrew St. George reported in the Spotlight on October 30th, 1978, and in a previous September 25th issue. Reports Internationals was established and controlled by frontmen for the Rockefeller and Rothschild's families and their enforcers in the CIA and allied agency Israel's Mossad. What made the report so explosive was that the newspaper pointed out that the illegally rigged casinos were being operated with the collusion of quote-unquote respectable politicians, law enforcement officials, Wall Street financiers who floated loans to finance the gambling resorts, and the high-profile gambling resorts operators themselves. St. George pointed out that many of these casinos run by the mob through a variety of frontmen have actually been engaged in a de facto partnership with behind-the-scenes mobsters who have assisted the CIA and Mossad in massive laundering of drug and gambling profits that have been channeled into covert operation of the two allied agencies. In return, CIA and the Mossad, using their own influence, have provided quote-unquote protection for the illegally fixed gambling operations, preventing law enforcement authorities from cracking down on the corruption. Where does would-be President Trump fit into this picture? To find that answer, one must turn to the murky origins of Resorts International. Resorts evolved from a CIA front company set up in the early 1950s by then CIA Director Allen W. Dulles and one of his close associates, three-term New York Governor Thomas E. Dewey, political functionary in the so-called Rockefeller Republican wing of the GOP. The front company in question was innocuously named Mary Carter Paint Company, which operated as a national chain of paint stores, but when set up would function as a covert CIA money laundering operation. In 58 to 59, Dewey and a number of associates used a reported $2 million in CIA funds to buy a controlling interest in the Crosby Miller Corporation, headed by Dewey's friend James Crosby, which then merged with Mary Carter. Among other things, the new corporation laundered CIA money for arming anti-Castro Cuban exiles. The company also launched into lucrative casino gambling enterprises in the Caribbean, where the CIA was quite active during that period. Having engaged in the Lansky crime syndicate is now thoroughly documented and widely known plots to topple Fidel Castro, who enraged the mob by closing down its Cuban gambling enterprises. Thus, it should be no surprise that in 1963, Alvin Mellink, top henchman of crime syndicate boss Meyer Lansky, was found to be closely connected to the operations of Mary Carter Paint. In 1963, Mary Carter Paint spun off its paint division and during the next several years began to develop its casino operations, primarily in the Bahamas. 67 to 68, Mary Carter Paint officially changed its name to Resorts International and began massive international expansion. The spotlight determined that several principal investors provided the funds and assets for the venture. Meyer Lansky, the acknowledged chairman of the board, and chief financier of the underworld gambling syndicate, who also maintained his own long-standing ties, not only to Israel and Mossad, but also to the CIA and the American intelligence community. David Rockefeller, head of the Rockefeller financial empire, who provided his family's clout and CIA and global banking connections to assist in the operations. The Investors Overseas Service, then the world's largest flight capital conglomerate, controlling assets worth $2.5 billion. Tibor Rosenbaum, who is not only the Mossad's Swiss-based chief financier behind covert arms deals, but also the head of the Banquet de Credit International of Geneva, the Lansky Syndicate chief European money launderer. Baron Edmund de Rothschild of the European banking family and personal business partner of Rosenbaum and Rosenbaum's Mossad-related ventures ranging far and wide. And lastly, William Mellon Hitchcock, one of the heirs to the Mellon family fortune, one of America's largest private family fortunes, which for many years has also maintained close ties with the CIA. Resorts International expanded by leaps and bounds and soon became one of the most profitable of all gambling enterprises, and by 1970 the underworld figures who were running the casino, in league with their behind-the-scenes partners, began moving to expand casino gambling in the United States. Mob Chief Lansky called a high-level meeting of gambling syndicate figures in Acapulco, Mexico, and there they assembled mobsters pinpointed the fading resorts of Atlantic City as their new target. Prior to that time, of course, the mob had already established Nevada as the only outpost of legalized gambling on U.S. soil. In the wake of this meeting, the resources of Resorts International were used publicly and privately to begin the lobbying campaign that resulted in the legalization of gambling in Atlantic City, and once the New York Jersey legislature opened the Garden State, Resorts moved in. In 1987, upon the death of longtime CIA frontman James Crosby, the nominal head of Resorts International, up-and-coming young New York real estate tycoon Donald Trump stepped in to the picture and bought Crosby's interest in the gambling empire. Trump soon became a household name with his colorful personality and his insistence upon naming a variety of luxury hotels, apartments, houses, and other commercial ventures after himself. But while the name Trump appeared in the headlines, the names of the real movers behind the Resorts International remained hidden from public view. Wow, this is a bombshell in my opinion. This shows that Trump has connections to Mossad and the CIA, and they're probably just using him as a front man so there's no suspicion. I wouldn't be surprised if this is still a rigged empire. People will say, oh yeah, Donald Trump has problems, but at least he doesn't want World War III, or he doesn't want war with the Russians. As a front man, he has no choice. He will do whatever the puppet masters say. Go read Albert Pike's 3 World Wars, and you will see that it's going to happen regardless of who the puppet is.
Don't worry about it. I like to do one thing at a time. I would knock the hell out of ISIS. Okay. I would hit them, Brian, so hard like they've never been hit. What about civilian casualties? What about the fact that we're targeting them and people are very concerned about collateral damage? I would do my best, absolute best, but we're fighting a very politically correct war. Yeah. Well, we see that happening in the other thing is with the terrorists, you have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families.
Does that sound like a peaceful man? Does that sound like someone who wouldn't go to war? If Trump was such an outsider, he would understand that stopping terrorism is as simple as stop arming them, stop funding them, stop training them. Terrorism is a Zionist creation to destabilize the Middle East. He'd understand what the Hegelian dialectic is, or the project for the new American century.
Came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Almost everything the New World Order achieved comes out of divide and conquer, or the Hegelian dialectic, or order out of chaos. Whatever you want to call it, this is what's occurring with Trump. We've already seen massive protests from minority radicals who are controlled. Their biggest financer is George Soros. The next step will be mobilizing the pro-Trump KKK and white nationalists, who have been controlled for a long time as well.
America was built by and for the white Christian people of this nation.
We have been seeing really ever since Barack Obama first won election in late 2008, a growth in groups on the radical right. In 2008, we went from about 150 so-called patriot groups, anti-government radical groups, to something like 1,360 groups in 2012. In the last year, though, Donald Trump has added fuel to that fire in a very big way.
Kim, why are you here? Go. Why are you here, man? Go. Why are you here? Let's go.
Al Gore and George Bush and people like Mitt Romney and these people, they're all the same. You know, they're all the same type of candidates. So it's pretty interesting this year to see something a little bit different. So, you know, we support those nationalist principles like closing the borders and things of that nature. So we do support those things, but we're not going to come out and endorse them.
Donald Trump wants to bring back jobs to America, give dignity to the American worker.
It's not that Trump is telling these groups what to think. They have, had their own white supremacist ideology for many decades now. What Trump is doing is legitimizing.
I came here to speak on behalf of Donald Trump. I've never met the man, but I can tell that he has nothing but the best interest of this country in heart.
Some of the things that he's saying are issues that we've been tackling for years now. When we talk about globalism, we talk about America first, these sort of things, bringing back American jobs. These are things that he's hitting on. So it's put a lot of our nationalism sort of becoming mainstream.
All we want is to change America back to what it was.
We do want to see whites, rise and have our own state here in this country.
I do think that Trump will probably help the movement grow as a whole. We may not see that reflected at rallies, but I think we will see it reflected on the number of people who are engaging with the ideas of the white supremacist movement, whether that's electronically on the internet or in actual person and face-to-face encounters.
I mean, we are all across the country going to be watching the polling places. Where we have chapters, where we have members, we're going to be unofficially monitoring those polls in different parts of the country.
This is where the Trump presidency becomes useful to the puppet masters. Out of the surge of white nationalism and white pride in general, there will be backlash from the controlled radical minority groups, and false flags to trigger civil unrest. Out of civil unrest comes a police state. Out of a police state comes complete control over the citizens and power in even fewer hands. This is something we need to be very vigilant about and not participate in. It will be controlled at the highest levels. Another thing we need to be aware of are the controlled psyopses of the alternative media. They give us half-truths and distortions, and they suck us back into the system that is in place to keep us enslaved. They can also do things like convince us a complete insider is an outsider.
Jones is working for the bad guys, then right here, right now. But I had to hang up on the guy and delay him out, because there's no point in letting him put out his COINTELPRO. What's COINTELPRO? According to FBI records, COINTELPRO resources were expended on infiltrating, disrupting, marginalizing, and/or subverting groups suspected of being subversive. I can't tell you how many times I've just gone to any political event.
Constantly put on the defensive against the federal government. Every single time. Be it the FCC coming to town and trying to shut down our local micro broadcaster. Be it the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration coming to town and trying to shut down and train the police officers to do blood withdrawals. Be it the DATF now.
That's an example of COINTELPRO. Here's another great example of COINTELPRO.
You are not going to get away with your activities. You are not going to get away.
Hey, ladies, the Second and First Amendment. Get the hell out of my face.
I'm here to tell you right now that we are not your property.
You're not part of the team.
Right now.
You're not part of the team. I mean, I almost started crying last night when I was at that demonstration. And I saw these families bringing their children up to me for me to shake their hand, and I just look at their innocence.
He's trying to take over our rally that a lot of people worked on.
Is that once they cause all the infighting and division and problems, then everyone spends their time on that, and then you can't expand your organizations.
All right, is the freedom movement divided in Austin? Somebody doesn't want to play nice.
And every time I go to a big city and see provocateurs, I've seen it in Austin.
Are you ready to rip down? No, provocateur!
That's COINTELPRO, playing that against people, creating racial division, infiltrating groups, trying to radicalize them, trying to get people to commit acts of violence so they can put them in prison.
And we're going to rouse and rise for humanity to identify who you are, and as you wage war against us, 1776!
You know what it's like to go to sleep every night knowing you work for a bunch of psychotic killers and you bastards are probably going to end up killing me one day? You know what it's like knowing you've ruined my life? You know what it's like, you sons of bitches? I'm tired of your crap!
When they bust a cap in my head, can you imagine what's going to happen? And that's their plan.
Right there, right there.
You work for Time Warner Cable?
Right there.
Is that who you work for?
I work for Alex Jones. Who do you work for?
You work for President
I work for InfoWars. INFOWARS.com. It's a website.
InfoWars.com. Okay, that's what I'm asking, so I can tell who you work for.
So you're so.
I mean, I don't hear anybody. Stop hearing how this devil.
People have been pulled back into this political system as if it's the answer when it's clearly not. If you've been in the truth-seeking movement or the alternative world for more than just a couple years before this election, you would have noticed all the massive amounts of people now trusting in the system again that does exactly what it's designed to do. If you're desperate for a solution, as most of us are, it's pretty easy to lie to ourselves. It's really as simple as whoever wins, the New World Order wins. Put away the personalities and just look at the system. They don't let you run unless you're accepted within the system or by the hidden hands. All an election is a giant stage show to hide the system. To achieve this, they have to entice you and pull you in just like a movie so you're in it till the end. Obama is a great example of this. Mr. Change. Nothing like George Bush, but he was kind of an outsider. Actually, way more of an outsider than Trump was. Obama was just a junior senator. And then he gets in office and pushes the same exact thing George Bush pushed, who's a complete opposite. He invades the same countries on the same list George Bush was going off of, the project for the New American Century document that was created before both of them were in office. They're simply puppets.